One of the most striking things was that it actually affects the movement with these children, affects their self-image. Like you get a much more positive self-image, and it's no wonder, because if you explore your world through your body, you're able to freely roam, you're able to explore your limits.
And when you do it at later ages, you actually feel a lot more younger. You feel a lot more vital and stronger, like everywhere in the body. And it transfers to like all aspects of life. Because when you feel good, you will do good, and when you do good, you get like amazing results in everything you do.
People take like running kind of as a self-evident thing, like you can run, but it's not a self-evident thing. At a certain point in your life, you were not able to run, you were not able to walk. This required like an enormous, process to happen in your body. I wouldn't do that in public, or that looks a bit ridiculous, or that looks funny, or people have this insecurity inside of them, a very like big insecurity. So people still, of course, care a lot about children and the well-being of children, which is why you can interestingly find a lot of articles, a lot of material, a lot of studies of the impacts of movement training on these children, and even just like small babies, like since they're born. When you become an adult, you're kind of like on your own. Nobody cares anymore. There's no recesses, so you don't get to, you just need to keep your lunch break, and that's it. Then you come back to your desk. But the interesting thing about this is that I think that whatever benefits we can see in kids or children when we look at movement, we can see a lot of this stuff even in adults. And if you're an adult who maybe as a kid you didn't move so much, it's not like a hopeless situation or something. You can still experience these benefits. And one of the most striking things was that it actually affects the movement with these children, affects their self-image. Like you get a much more positive self-image, and it's no wonder, because if you explore your world through your body, you're able to freely roam, you're able to explore your limits, become a skillful mover. It's no wonder that you also start to like feel better as a result of that. And it also affects, your brain health. It has like correlations to your academic success later. You become better at solving problems. You develop self-regulation, self-awareness as a result of moving as a young person. And most of all, you become independent, because if you need like someone helping you, someone supervising you constantly, how independent can you be? So you need to be able to move yourself and orient yourself in the world to be even independent, to go to places, to reach for things, to eat yourself, not to be fed by someone. This is all like motor skills that you learn as a young human being. And all of this, which affects children, this affects essentially their participation in different social activities, can be sports, can be in the schools, and their social relationship that they're developed through their bodies. Because this is really, the mind and body, I think, cannot even really be properly separated. They're almost like a one thing. And so all of this that I just explained here, I believe that this same stuff, I'm not even talking about the effects of, better mobility, better body control, or strength, or mobility, like this stuff what I usually talk about. And I'm not even talking about that. This is just like this very primary, fundamental things that goes into growing as a human being. And all of this, I believe it affects also adult beings. Like if you're an adult, you can also increase your positive self-image, or you can have a better positive self-image. You can have a perhaps better participation in social activities. You can feel better about yourself. You can be better at problem solving by doing movement training. So I think it's interesting that we neglect a lot of time this free movement, which is, if we look at these children, it's fundamental, it's vital for healthy development of children. Like there's no question about it. You will not become like a normal, healthy human being usually if you don't get free movement. Free movement doesn't have to be like lizard crawls or something like this, just moving your body freely, imitating. And we just kind of forget this as we grow older, and still look at people, this sedentary lifestyle we have. I think we adults and even youngsters, teenage people, and even old people, seniors, we need this kind of free movement almost like more than ever before.
Yeah, if you look at adults today, most people, they do like 4 different movement patterns. They walk, they sit, they lie down,
Yeah.
And
Good.
okay, there's only 3. So
Okay,
that's
fourth one is like brushing your teeth.
the brushing your teeth or picking some like a cup up from there. But for the most part, all these movement patterns are very simple. But then when you look at children, they move in all possible ways. They walk on all fours, they crawl, and so on. And you talk about the child development, and it is like absolutely crucial part in developing the brain, developing the central nervous system, and developing like the whole ability to cope with the world and deal with the world. And through like different movement patterns, like crawling, walking on all fours, and eventually walking, running, rolling, and climbing trees and all this stuff, the child develops his brain and nervous system to deal with the world and also to deal with like everything outside the world. Like everything, when you improve your body, everything improves because you can think more clearly, you can solve problems more easier, and so on. And I remember seeing, because there's a very famous TED talk which talks about why we develop brains to begin with, because it's not like brain is not every organism on earth has a brain, and there's like a very limited brains, and then there's very expanded brains like humans have. And the scientists argued that the brain was developed for the purpose of movement, like in order to move from one place to another. And after that, it was developed to like to deal with other human beings and other organisms, and also survival. But the foremost reason for development of the brain was to move from one place to another. And likewise, as human beings, we technically and basically evolve from a small baby to a grown adult. And the same happens here. Like we move in very simple ways, then it gets more and more complex until we are like teenagers. And then maybe when we are around 18 or 21 years old, we are at the peak and the highest like physical level for most people. It's not for everyone, because most, like as humans, our highest peak is usually in our 30s. But most people, they hit their like the highest level in the teenager years or when they're like 20 years old. And it's all the accumulation of different movement, sports and stuff like this.
Yes, like it goes from these big movements of just like crawling, and there's no like fine-tuned movement there. You're not, trying to like write something with pencil. It goes to these very fine-tuned movements. Even this can be considered movement, just like your, the brushing your teeth and writing something with your pen, or even holding like a spoon or something. That this is like very fine-tuned motor control. And of course, like Samuli explained, this more athletic sports type of movements that actually people take like running kind of as a self-evident thing. Like you can run, but it's not a self-evident thing. At a certain point in your life, you were not able to run, you were not able to walk. This required like an enormous, process to happen in your body. And I think it's very interesting that I believe that, children learn a lot of these movement patterns also from adults. It's like they watch people who are around them. They are like very observant. Like the child's brain is like it absorbs everything, all of this information. And what you see outside of yourself, even these running patterns or walking patterns of other people and the movement patterns of your parents, this is what they like try to often emulate. So it's very crucial that even if you have children or something like that you're also showing like this example, because children will imitate this. And I remember very vividly because my dad was like used to be a sprinter in his teenage years and like even competing in that. And I never became a sprinter or athlete like this myself, but I remember seeing my dad run when I was a kid, and it was very different running from what I was used to seeing from many people. This kind of like just boom, boom. There was like very interesting explosiveness and this, how to say, springiness into his running. And I was surprised because I had not thought of my dad as an athletic person because he didn't do that much sports as an adult, but it was clear that this background that he had in running had this like remnants and very strong like skill development in his body even to his later age. And I remember seeing this, and I remember also that changing my own running. It changed how I started to run. And like I said, I didn't become a sprinter, but I remember this very vividly, and I took it from him, like that style. Like children observe these things so clearly, and this imitation is very important because by, for example, imitating these animal movements was a way that people have developed their bodies systematically. Maybe it's the oldest way that people have ever developed their bodies systematically, like at least one of the old ways. If you look at the Shaolin Temple or the Kaleripayattu, what is often stated to be the oldest martial art in the world, these people trained with animal movements systematically. And I was wondering why would they even do that? But it tells about our innate ability to imitate and the innate importance of the imitation in our development, because that's how we grew up. So these people also, they look at these felines and apes and reptiles in the wild, and they're like, wow, these animals, they can move, like they're so limber, they're so powerful, they're so fast, like we need to do something that they're doing, these animals are doing, in order to be able to move ourselves so freely as well. And I think this is partly the imitation led to this development of this animal movement type of training that even we are doing today. And even for myself, I try to look at inspiration from animals many times when doing this training.
Yeah, I would say like these very primal movement patterns, they are like the foundation of everything. Like as a children and as babies, we were built on these movement patterns. But only as adults, we kind of forget everything about what happened in the past. But the problem is that the foundational elements should never like become obsolete, because everything has been built upon them. And likewise, the reason why as adults we lose our ability to move, why we get stiff, why we get limited, is because we move and live in very limited and strict patterns. Like we no longer do the foundational elements we used to do. And as a result, we get more stiff, more limited year after year. And like I said, most people do only 3 different movement patterns or something like this, like big patterns. And even if we train, if we go to the gym, we do only like up and down, and likewise. Of course, some people do sports, but some sports are also very limited, like you only run from one point to point B, like the sprinting. But you mentioned the animals like cheetah or leopard and so on.
Yeah.
Like they move in like incredible ways, and they're very fluid, they're very dynamic. And if we want, as humans, if we want to have the similar capability and the similar levels of limberness and mobility, we also have to be able to train and move and live in such ways. Of course, it doesn't mean like we're walking on all fours on street and so on, but our training should be very multidimensional, multifaceted, and have lots of different moving components and dimensions in regards to how you move and how you train yourself. Because, like I said, we have the capability to move, so why not use it?
Yes, and what you mentioned about this culture, like you usually do maybe few exercises, and they are all in like one plane. So there's no 3D motions like bicep curl here, bench press again in one direction. Like everything happens like this way. Whereas in movement training, or even in nature, and even the way many animals move or children move, it's not a robotic way of moving. It's a very free way of moving in all possible planes in these 3D motions. And if we talk about like some of the benefits of movement training, one of the things that most people don't even realize, and one of the biggest things that was for me, was this freedom, like realizing a fundamental freedom of moving your body. And this was such a liberating moment. I remember this very well because I was doing, this regular gym training. So I was doing mostly one-dimensional movements. And the gym culture itself is so filled with these dogmas. It's filled with very established rules of how you should be doing things. Where to keep your shoulders? Where are you allowed to keep your shoulders? How are you allowed to keep your spine? What kind of posture when you're doing an exercise? Should your knees go over the toes or not? How should your neck be? Like every single joint has this rule of like forbidden articulation where you shouldn't probably take it, or which you shouldn't train, or which you shouldn't touch. And these rules, when I went to movement training, they weren't, at least, I know that movement training has also developed dogmas over the years. Like there are people who are dogmatic about it and are quite strict about it, but I never had this. And especially when I started like years ago when we went here, this was still quite unexplored territory. There were few people who were popularizing it, but still, when I went into that, there was no strict rules of what I was able to do with my body. And this is something that completely transformed my view on training, because by doing that movement training, I no longer had this like strict idea of how my body should orient in the space, how I should be moving. I was just doing the movements, and I let my body kind of go in any kind of ways. Because actually, it's not just that there are rules about the form. There's also rules about the actual execution of the exercise, how controlled it should be, how what is the range of motion should be. There should be no bounce or something like this. But in natural movement, you are using like your body to its fullest capacity. You're using all of these stretch reflexes, these kinetic chains, you're building, like I sometimes talk about these muscle bridges with your body. You're using the body as a whole in synchrony. And this freedom was amazing, because I realized I can actually move my body anyway, and I can explore any position in my body. And this fundamental realization was the thing that actually led me to exploring all these movements. And as a result, I started to see development in my body that I couldn't anticipate, that was not even possible with the regular training, because I was exploring things and doing things with my body that I would have never done before. So I experienced benefits that I had never seen before.
Yeah, for the last 6 years or 7 years, we have been doing this. Our motto has always been be limitless. And it really means that have no limitations in regards to anything. Always have like an open mind and open body in regards to what you can do. Because they are like in nature there are certain natural laws, but there really isn't any dogmas or any defined strict ways of conduct. Because nature is dynamic, it's fluid, and it's very elastic. It just goes from like this. But what I like about the most about animal movements and movement training in general is that how holistic it is. Mm-hmm. Because when you look at other type of training, like let's say you have strength training, then you have bodybuilding, you are building muscle, then you have stretching and so on. And all of these are very beneficial forms of training. Mm-hmm. But what I like the most about movement training, animal movement training, is that it's the most holistic way of training, because you get so many different benefits. Like nowadays, when I train my legs, the animal movements and the movement training is my most preferred way of developing the legs, because I not only get strength and size as well as with other types of training, but I also get more flexible and more mobile every time I do it, like increasingly so. Like I don't even have to do so much stretching, because the animal movements alone stretch the muscles naturally. And if you look at animals or any other organism on earth, they don't do any I need to do some stretching, or maybe cats do. Yeah, but even the cat, it's very
instinctive.
Yeah, instinct, and it's very compound. It's not like I'm now going to stretch my tricep, or now I'm going to stretch my hamstring. They don't utilize like 10 different. They stretch the whole body at once, and likewise. And it's not only just that I get so many benefits, but it's also because it's full body and a large compound exercises or movements. They also burn body fat very effectively because they burn calories. Because when you're using the whole body and you're also utilizing your mind, because these are not like simple up and down movements, you are per minute you're actually burning a lot more calories compared to, like, let's say overhead press or something like this. Of course, it depends on the weight and everything and tempo. But in general, I feel the most exhausted and the most trained after I have trained animal movements in a long time. For a long time.
Yeah, that's something that I don't even think about anymore that much, that the exhaustion, because I've been doing animal movements for quite a while, and every time I do workout now, or if we're even filming a video where I'm doing animal movements, I'm usually like, I'm just wiped out like completely. It's unbelievable, even after training with them for many years. Of course, I've become better and I'm more fluent and I have more endurance, but still the impact, because if you think about how it activates really like almost every, well, not every part, but it activates and engages so many areas in your body. And it engages your legs, your core, your shoulders, your arms, your triceps, like everything will be more or less engaged. And this really like uses a lot of energy in your body, but it also, as a result, it develops your body, it develops these attributes, and it makes you that much stronger. And like you said, that it's one of the most holistic ways of training the body, but it's not based on this sort of isolation. And isolation is good training, but it's when you're moving your body with these whole body movements, or even from martial arts or dance or these animal movements. So like the movement is more than the sum of its parts. So you are developing mobility, you're developing flexibility and strength and such. But in movement training, it's the combination of all of this is more than just having flexibility in isolation, mobility in isolation, or strength in isolation, or whatever, agility in isolation. You're using everything in congruence. Like this is one of I think the greatest thing about movement training, because as a human being and as when we're moving into nature, we are using everything together. And in movement training is one of the only ways where you really learn to use everything together. And you learn to use it in this natural way, in this like a flow manner that you said. So we have mechanisms in our body that produce efficient movement, like limber movement. For example, as I mentioned, the stretch of legs, and our tissues like have the capacity to store kinetic energy. Like if I have my finger here, if I bend my finger like this way and I release it, it just springs back. Like that's elastic recoil, and every single tissue in our body has this ability. If you stretch it, it has the ability to store energy, and you release it and it springs you back. It helps you actually to move. Even when you walk or you run, like your Achilles tendon and everything, it's not like your calf muscles alone like push you forward. No, your tendons and your soft tissue always store energy that is then released together with the muscle contraction. And this actually makes our movement that much more efficient, that much more limber, and that much more, let's say, powerful. And I like movement training in that you get to, in a lot of the movements, you get to train these natural functional abilities of your tendons, of your soft tissue. Because actually this is a healthy, an ability of a healthy tissue. Your healthy tissue is able to stretch, is able to stretch and then contract back. And if you lose this ability, you have less healthy tissues. So you can, through movement training, you can restore this ability of your tissue to store energy, release it, to become more nimble, pliable, and resilient for all sort of tensile and stress. Like you become very tolerant for all kinds of strain that can come from movement. And this, I think, is fantastic because it also developed this in so many different angles and let's say positions in your body.
Yeah, by returning to the roots of your own physicality, the way you used to move maybe 20 years ago or 30 years ago, it can be like, in a way, a fountain of youth, because you are actually like reclaiming back these capabilities and these neural pathways and all this muscle control and mobility and limberness that you used to have. And when you do it at later ages, you actually feel a lot more younger. You feel a lot more vital and stronger, like everywhere in the body. And it transfers to like all aspects of life, because when you feel good, you will do good, and when you do good, you get like amazing results in everything you do.
Yeah.
And I think and trust me when I say this, that animal movements are better for many parts of the body than the conventional lifts. That they are just much better. Like nowadays, because I used to do back squats for 5 years or something like this, or longer, and deadlifts, and of course I still do them sometimes because they're like a good structural exercise. There's nothing wrong with the traditional ways of training either, but the better I get as an athlete and as a mover and as a human being, the more I want to focus only on the animal movements. Like the less I want to do this, because my body is getting more balanced and more structurally sound and so on, so that I don't even need the stiff and limited exercise anymore. And instead I want more dynamic strength. I want more fluidity and all these other capabilities, and all these versatile and ways of moving. Like that's what I need. Like I already know I'm strong, so now what I need is, of course you want more strength always, you want more muscle maybe, but what I personally need the most is just the movement ability, real athleticism. Like I don't think there's any other type of training that actually produces more real athleticism, because most of these traditional lifts, for example back squat, they will make you more powerful when you already have good levels of athleticism. But if you give back squats and deadlifts to a person who's stiff and limited, he will stay stiff and limited. He's not going to change. He will stay unathletic and so on. But if you give animal movements and movement training to a person who's not athletic, who doesn't have a good physical background or foundation, he will build that foundation and athleticism through these movements. Like he will become athletic. And if you want to add more like raw power and raw like strength, then you can do like heavy back squats after you have the foundation set. But most people don't have this foundation. Like I never had it, and my solution was to listen to what everyone else was saying, like just do back squats, do deadlifts, and do sprints. And I did this for 5 years, and I didn't get anywhere. Like, of course, I got better than I was before, but it was still light years behind many others. But only after I started to do more versatile, more well-rounded, and more holistic movements, I actually started to build the real athleticism, which is hard to quantify, hard to define, but I know it's there. Everyone knows it exists, because you can see it from the results, in the general results and your general movement, how you move and how you perform.
Yes. This is what you explained about like doing back squats and not getting anywhere, or actually going even worse or stiffer, happened to me to an extent, and I had a background even in some of the movement stuff and acrobatics, because I had been doing like the taekwondo, and I had been already doing some animal movements. I had been doing some, just movement skill training, watching the Jackie Chan. Like this was the beginning of my movement training. I had been doing this, and I had been even doing the capoeira stuff. Like I was fairly mobile. And then I went to do just this like weight lifting training for a period of time, and I started to get stiffer. I had, by the way, I had like imbalances, structural imbalances in my body that I had never dealt with, and I already had some like pains there. They were already there, but I started to just throw these weights on my back and squatting, and as a result, I started to get really like stiffer all the time, like stiffer. I gained strength also, and there were benefits, because of course my legs became stronger, and I could actually know this even from doing back squats. I could know these benefits to my athleticism to an extent, but the net benefit was kind of lost in the negative effects that I started to produce from my body with this more like too simplistic type of training. And the reason why even I went because we talk about returning to the roots, and I literally like returned to the roots because the movement type of training was how I started to develop my body. And for a period of time, I forgot that completely. Right? I just went into the bodybuilding, weightlifting, heavy, like I was focused on the numbers, aesthetics, skills, all this external stuff. So we talk about our story many times that, it caused a lot of havoc in our bodies. They were not severe injuries, but we had pains and aches and all sorts of problems everywhere in our bodies. So the intuition just told at some point, this is not the way to go. Like we need to return to somewhere. And I didn't know about the benefits of movement training like we know now. I had no idea about these different benefits that it could bring. It was just an intuition, just like a hunch. This is what I used to do. This is when I used to move in a very versatile good ways. I felt good in my body. So maybe I should return back to these old ways that I was doing. And even then realizing, this is something I, did even as a kid. And this is why my tissues, my muscles were pliable, why they felt better, why they felt good, why I felt nimble, why I felt just happy moving my body, why I felt the joy of moving my body. Like this is what I had forgotten completely. And many people forgot them because they just get into this one-dimensional way of training and you get all these rules and you forget the freedom that you had as a child. And this is, what often happens even as we just grow up in general. We get all these rules and a lot of these rules are good, but some of these rules, they pressure us into these boxes and we cannot anymore like break out of them. So movement training was this step back to the roots, but it was also a step forward into the future regards to the body and my abilities. It really that was the first thing that started to open up my body because I started to move it in ways that truly challenged my body in these multiple planes. And even doing, and I mentioned about like moving in these more pliable ways. But when I started, it was much more clumsy. I was very clumsy moving at first. I got immediately tired and I didn't feel natural at all in my movements. And I think this is what people, maybe they see me nowadays, they maybe think that, oh, this guy was always like this. But I was much stiffer when I was starting. And I was much weaker when I started. I just kept going. I just kept doing because I didn't care. There was no rule, like there was no one judging me. And actually, a major thing about that movement training, because many people comment in a lot of the posts that I put out when I'm doing movements. People comment like, well, this I wouldn't do that in public, or that looks a bit ridiculous, or that looks funny, or people have this how to say, insecurity inside of them, a very like big insecurity. And I'm not saying like you necessarily need to go into the public to do these movements, but I'm saying that if and you need to care about people, but you shouldn't care about people's opinions if they come in the way of you and your well-being. Like this is the thing. Of course, you have to care about people, but you cannot be like so worried about other people's opinions that you actually don't do stuff that would do good for you and the stuff that would do no harm for other people. So people are just even insecure to try these movements. And this is why it makes a very nice psychological effect also in your brain. Like you become much more brave, you have more courage, and eventually just are more confident in yourself as a whole, because you no longer care what these people said, because you go out of the norm. And I think that also brought very interesting like psychological development in me, like just through movement training.
Yeah, the reason we talk about like health, mobility, posture, athleticism and stuff like this, instead of only focusing on like building muscle and losing fat, is because the reality is this, that if you live a very healthy life and focus on training like consistently, you will look good. But what matters is that what other problems you have after you have already achieved the look and the size you have like achieved. Like that's what, and it's just very shallow. Like Eero has been very big and strong for a very long time. I've also muscle and stuff, and Like after you have it, it's like it's like whatever. Like who cares? Like it's really is like this.
Yes.
Like only when you're like beginning and you don't have the body you can be proud of like this. You are like obsessed only on the superficial metrics. But if you are like a really good athlete in any sport, or if you go to the gym regularly and eat well, you will look good. And it's not like a hard thing. Like it's very, all these are very like, it's not like a...
Yeah, it's made to be like this, like how do you get to look good? Like what do you have to do? Do you like do this very fine-tuned bodybuilding training or something? Like, you know, you have your like athletes who don't do much weight training or something and they can look amazing. Like they can really already
and
look.
When you get older, you realize that you don't even care about the looks. Like what you actually care about is how you feel, because the older you get, the less you care about everyone else's opinion of you. Because all these young guys, they just, I need to get abs, I need to get biceps, because they need the recognition and the all this attention from the others. But once you get older, you realize, especially once you achieve a lot of this like success in training, it's not relevant or even important at all, or it is, but it's very small. But because what actually matters is health and how you move and just how you feel every day. And in this sense, the limberness, mobility, it trumps all of it. Even if you look at some of the best athletes, like Tom Brady, for example, he is considered, and he is one of the best athletes ever, despite being one of the oldest athletes ever to compete at that level. And even he has talked a lot about pliability and how important it is. And his coach has also talked about how the longevity and the performance over the long run is determined by the pliability. And you don't achieve it by doing just very simple limited lifts every day. Like you actually have to move the body, you have to actually take care of the body and so on, to actually get this body that is pliable, dynamic, mobile, flexible, and so on.
Yes, and not like movement training, as we have stated, it's not like still the only thing that we do. Like we still do a lot of other stuff, and it's not like the all-encompassing like perfect system that would have everything to it. In a way, like I find it difficult on how to determine this movement training in general, because we could say like everything is movement. And I think in our approach, in some ways, we like everything is part of the movement. Even if we do like weightlifting or something, you could say that it's kind of like movement training. But the way we usually like determine this is movements are these like holistic, whole body movements that are like the animal movements or martial arts movements or dance movements, or like, there's so many movements in martial arts and all this kind of stuff. And even like to extent like skill training or movement skill training. And then we have the other side of the training, which is more like structured. There is isolation, there's integration, all of this. So the other type of training is also important. I found a lot of like importance from it. But I would not, if I had never done the movement training, I would be like having so much more abilities losing from my body, because you have to learn to move your body as a whole. Like even though I think it's very important to develop things in isolation. It has made me again much better mover, and I've been able to refine my body control in many joints, because there are limitations to movement training to an extent that sometimes if you're, for example, at an older age, you already have so much limitation in your body. And even if you were to do movements, then you will kind of avoid things where you will feel the weakest, or things that would feel uncomfortable for you. You will avoid this kind of movement patterns. So it sometimes requires more conscious effort and more, let's say, laser-focused effort to drill into some of these limitations that you have in your body in order to expand upon them. So, but regardless of all of this, I think this moving as a whole is such a fundamental part in also expressing yourself, because the self-expression is something that unlocks physical possibilities in your body that otherwise just wouldn't be there. Like there's if you go and you explore movements freely and you explore them with an open mind, you will find things about your body that you wouldn't otherwise even find. And these abilities that you're developing, one of that we also talk about is, for example, structural strength and supportive strength. We often emphasize like supportive strength is one of the most important things that you develop with movement training. And this means it's like your ability to carry your body weight in all kinds of positional and angles, to carry and support yourself when moving. And this is very difficult to develop if you're just standing still and doing exercises, or even, just standing still and doing like squatting up and down. You only develop this like in one plane. But if you're on all fours, you're dynamic, you're moving through the space, you're developing it really in all these possible positions. And you're mimicking things that would happen actually in real life. So this is what when it comes to the fact that you talk about like these athletes, because athletes know that this is the reality of the game. Like or in many sports, like you're gonna find yourself in so many different positions, and which are not just standing still exercises. They're all like dynamic positions where you need to rely on your body to really withstand and carry your body, and you rely on your tendons and your muscles and your ligaments to really support you in these positions. And it's very difficult to prepare for these kind of situations unless you have also training to back this up, training to make you nimble or limber or elastic. And this is, I think, where movement training comes into play. And when you see a lot of even athletes nowadays, like football players or even wrestlers doing movement training, it just has something fundamental for our athleticism.
Yeah, actually in BJJ and wrestling, animal movements have been around for probably hundreds of years, and they are very popular, and they are becoming more popular even in football and so on. But the difference between, let's say, what Eero is doing and what these other guys are doing is that because for these other sports, the animal movements they pick maybe 4 or 5 different ones, which is not a lot. And then they also only use it in a very small and narrow manner as a warm-up. So they don't actually use it as a strength training method at all, because what we actually did to animal movements in the past 7 or 8 years, as long as we have been around, we actually turned animal movements into a like real strength training method. We call it animal movement strength training, AMST. And it's like an actual method with actual methodology in regards to how you can strengthen the body utilizing different movement patterns. So it's not just, let's just do bear walk from point A to point B and then switch to crab walk and that's it. But it's actually very wide and very deep ways of developing the body, because we realize that this is one of the best ways to actually bring the holistic benefits and produce the holistic results for the body. So why not go deeper to this way of training and actually make it big part of our training as like standard strength training? And nowadays, when I get better and better as a athlete and person, it just becomes more and more important for myself to focus on these ways of training instead of everything else, because I don't have joint pain on everything. So I just need to be able to move better and perform better, because after you have the size and the body fat percentage and so on, which is not your because of course, like if you focus on the animal movements, you will get really fit, like you get incredibly fit. You will get maybe the most fit compared to like most. You will get as fit as with any really high level sport or way of training. Like you will build muscle, you will lose fat as effectively as with any other type of training. What matters is that what kind of athleticism you have as a result, and do you have pains and aches and problems after you have reached the high level.
Yeah, and it's very good that you brought the animal movement strength training here, because it's the way that some people even do movement training may not be so effective. It depends. Like if you just kind of do it this is the thing, like some people just kind of try do a few times like catwalk here and there, and they're like, well, what's it gonna do? But if you do this like with the actual methodology that we give, and actually you do movements that we give, because a lot of these even movements that you find in our courses or methods, you cannot find them for even everyone else. Like we have actually created a lot of movements. I have created a lot of movements specifically, like the more I have, or the better I have become at training, and the better I have become being more in tune with my body and controlling my body, the better I became at doing movements and even creating movements. And this is also the potential of movement training to develop your body is dependent on like how really what kind of methodology you apply also to them. So like and with this animal movement strength training, you get certain parameters and principles on how to make these movements the most effective as possible. And you also get to try movements that actually are very varied, because even movement training, it's easy to stay on, well, I just do crab walk, bear and monkey. Those are very good, those are fundamental movements, but there's a lot that you can expand on. And one of our methods is also the variability. Like the variability is in the heart of movement training. It means that you do a host of different movements. You can actually create your own movements. This is also even what I teach in movement training, like how you can vary these movements by yourself. And this is the fundamental element what I explain about free movement and children. They create. They don't have this rule. They can create. They can be creative as possible to do these movements. And you can have the same power actually, and you can use that same power to also build your body. But you don't judge the effectiveness of movement training if you haven't really done it, if you really tried it, and if you haven't really gone into it. Also, in some cases, this is required. I really know that people do sometimes just like some bear walk and think that it doesn't do anything. But that's not what movement training. You need to spend some time in there. You need to really
you have
be
to
mindful.
have an actual method and actual way of training. Because I remember I did all this traditional lifting and calisthenics and gymnastics for years and years. Then I remember the time I went to a yoga class.
Oh yeah.
And it was the hardest. It was the craziest way, the most intense way of training I've ever done.
Yoga class.
Yeah, like yoga class. Like people think yoga is easy, but it was the most intense and the hardest, like really the hardest. And I was lifting super heavy. And I was thinking I'm strong, but I went to yoga class and it was the hardest ways of training I've ever done at the time. And similarly, all this, and then I started experimenting with animal movements, and they were equally hard, but they were more dynamic and maybe more masculine and more well-rounded version of yoga basically. But it had the same supportive strength element and the structural balance and mobility and limberness. It had a lot of the same elements, but it was just more holistic and even more dynamic because you are actually moving. In yoga, you are mostly like standing on one place and doing these different movement and stretches. But like you said, if I were to, before joining the class and before actually going through the method, if I had tried different yoga movements or stances, they would have felt nothing. Like the warrior pose, it's like, yeah, this is nothing. Or the downward facing dog, it's like, this is nothing. But you don't realize that if you hold it for long periods of time, one after another, then it becomes effective. You only feel it after you have implemented the stance and the exercise as part of the method, as a part of the training structure. And nowadays, if you look at YouTube for animal movements and so on, like Eero is one of the pioneers, because even if there's like lots of different videos from other sources, like I know they got the movements from us because they use the same names as we do, and we didn't get the name from yoga or from, let's say, martial art. We got the name from our head. We gave the name to that movement. So that's why we know that most people online, when they do animal movements, they actually got the idea and the first movement from us because they use our names.
Yeah, I also saw some of these videos. I was like, oh, that's a crouching tiger. Oh, that didn't exist before we put it.
Or the chameleon walk.
Yeah, the chameleon walk. Yeah, I also saw this, and
but the problem is that because they just copy and mimic, they don't actually know how to utilize the movements properly. They just okay, I just try a little bit and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you can just pick movements from a video and do them,
and it's already good.
Yeah, it's already good, but I don't know. I still feel like getting maybe a little bit more even detail. I mean, like I explained, the imitation is good. Like you can watch these movements and such, but you need to have then the understanding of really like going to the end with these movements, like really searching them and doing them properly. And like Samuli explained about this time, like it's so important that when you do in yoga, you do this movement one after another, so you increase the time under tension in these movements. And actually what you need to realize is that the adaptability or the changes that happen in your tissue, they respond sometimes to time. Like people think that only the intensity, like maximal weight, and it lasts like 2 seconds and that creates a change. No, in movement training you don't necessarily feel anything within 2 seconds, but the adaptation is massive if you stay just like 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes or something like this. And this we even cover like in the time method. But maybe as just kind of final word here, we talk a lot about everything, is that I started with talking about children, but what you really need to understand that at any age, your development doesn't stop, never. Like your physical, mental development will grow as long as you try, keep growing yourself. So you can make tremendous changes in your body at any age. You can be 50, 60, even we have like people 80 years old doing
83, 84.
Yeah, over 80 years old doing movement training exercises. We have many 50 years old or 60 years old. And we have people who, for example, at their 30s, they say they feel better in their bodies than in their 20s. Like multiple examples, people, and even I feel better now than I felt in my early 20s. And I'm already 30 years old. So you can get a total rejuvenation with these movements. You need to trust on them. You need to train with them for a time, like not just try once and then, leave them there. Like allow these movements through time to really cause this rejuvenation.
And I would also say that you have to be open-minded and you have to try it.
Yes.
And you have to try it for extended period of time in the session, because I think a lot of people who are very, let's say, narrow-minded and like this, stubborn, they're like, yeah, I just do my back squat and the bench press. Like I don't want to try this, but just try it and you will feel it. Like you realize how unathletic and how stiff and how weak you also are, because a lot of these movements are just core strength or pressing strength and so on. There's nothing like extreme about them. It's just raw strength, and you will realize that you are actually very weak in addition to being unathletic and immobile. And that's a good, like we said, that's a good idea, because you will realize that weakness is just potential in disguise. So once you fix these areas, then you are actually more complete athlete, more complete human being. And as a result, you will feel a lot better about yourself and about your performance and about your body.
Yes, that's it. It's the positive self-image.
Yes.
Stay strong.
Stay strong.